quantity of quizzers query on the questionable quirk in the quagmire. That's right, I'm talking about fungi, the elusive creature that gets forgotten about far too often. How do they reproduce, you ask? Well, let's break this up into sections. The first of these 4 sections will be how non-mushrooms reproduce, be it yeasts, molds, or plant diseases. The second of the 4 sections will tie in with the third, and we'll look at what the cells and reproductive cells of fungi look like. The third section of the 4 looks at how it actually reproduces. And finally, the 4th section is just a little bit of bonus fun. There are so many different types of fungi that aren't solely mushrooms. There are mushrooms, molds, yeasts, and plant diseases like rusts, smuts, and mildews. Most of this video will be on mushrooms, so I'll briefly capture the idea of yeasts and molds, but they're very similar to mushroom reproduction too. Most yeasts reproduce asexually by slowly growing another cell out of the original as the larger helps the smaller one grow until they separate. This is called budding. Other yeasts will grow by duplicating their DNA and simply splitting like mitosis. Mold and many other plant diseases are very similar to mushrooms, which we'll be getting into right now. All fungi cells are eukaryotic, and the normal mushroom cells have a rigid cell wall made of chitin to protect cells from drying out. This cell wall protects mycelium and most other cells in the mushroom. Mycelium is the actual part of the mushroom, and what we see is called a fruiting body. Also, the ends of the mycelium are called hyphae, which is important later. The mycelium is the tree, while the fruiting body is the apple. Now that we know a little bit of what a normal cell looks like, let's take a look at a few reproductive processes in cells. Note, there are 2 categories that I have for how cells reproduce. The type of reproduction, asexual, sexual, a mix, and the phylum that they are in, funky names like Ascomycota, Basidiomycota, or Zygomycota. This will be further explained, but keep it in mind. Let's start with Ascomycota. Ascomycota can reproduce sexually or asexually. Asexually, it is produced via the ascus, plurally as asci, and the word ascus translates to a sac, and that it is. These sacs hold spores. Spore is a 2008 game where you create your own... Oh, sorry, wrong topic. A spore is a little cell of DNA surrounded by a few different layers of coating to protect it from the universe. That's right, these bad boys can survive in space. They won't grow, but they can go to space, come back, and still grow like any other mushroom. Anyway, the asci hold spores, also called conidia in this specific case, and when the conditions are right, they'll shoot them out. Cup fungi will shoot them out when in contact with water, and some asci can shoot spores out as fast or faster than bullets. The sexual way that fungi of Ascomycota reproduce is by having holes in the cell wall connect the cells of 2 different fungi. Then compatible hyphae will fuse together. The nuclei will move from one cell to another and create what is known as a dikaryon. Lots of cell divisions and joinings occur until ascospores form inside the ascus. These ascospores are shot out of the ascus to grow just like asexual spores. Next up is Basidiomycota, which is similar to Ascomycota. In Basidiomycota, little pockets are on the mushroom, and these holes have basidia and cystidia. Basidia is where the reproduction happens. In the asexual form of reproduction, basidia just create spores and let the air flow them on a journey until they land somewhere to grow. Sexually, a spore grows in a special tube to form mycelium as a haploid cell. The nuclei inside then split. This comes in contact with mycelium from another fungus, and the 2 form a secondary mycelium, which is dikaryotic. The secondary mycelium grows with 1 nucleus from each parent by clamp connections, basically a fancy way to go through mitosis and keep the 2 nuclei. This splitting continues, and then bam! You've got yourself a big cluster of mycelium, and it's its own creature. That was very confusing. But don't worry, there's another way Basidiomycota reproduce sexually. Hyphae meet and form a structure called basidium in the basidia. Remember that? That was when spores came out asexually. The nuclei of the two different cells fuse together to make a zygote. The zygote goes through meiosis to make two haploids. Then these haploids go through mitosis. Now the four haploids go to the tip of the basidium and become their own separate spores to go do their thing. Now that's all the ways that Basidiomycota reproduce sexually. Psych! There's more! These are only the first two most common out of who knows how many. Ah!
Everything okay?
Mushrooms, man, they mystify me. They make me mad. Don't worry! Those two are the most common ways Basidiomycota reproduce sexually, and the only two I'll talk about. Lastly is Zygomycota, which is a bit funky. It produces asexually and then sexually in its life cycle. In its youth, it reproduces asexually. It forms loads of spores being made in a sporange, which rhymes with orange. It's usually called a sporangium though, which is just disappointing. The sporangium grows on a special type of hyphae that's as thin as a human hair, called a sporangiophore. These spores fly off and grow somewhere. The fungi produces hyphae called gametangia. Gametangia can be two different sexes, plus or minus. Opposites attract, and they form a structure with thousands of nuclei. The gametangia go inside what's known as a zygospore. The zygospore has plus and minus mixed together and create a diploid nuclei. Then the zygospore lays dormant for a few moments. Later, the zygospore grows and makes germ sporangia, which are very similar to the asexual spores in sporanges, but the spores are haploids from the diploids in the nucleus. The sporanges go and grow. Well, we've done it. Those were the basics. Hopefully some of it was clear, but it's okay if it wasn't. It took me a good 30 minutes of rereading notes to remember what meiosis was in its entirety. Don't worry though, we're on to the final section, Welcome to the bonus section. Some extra tidbits of knowledge will sprinkle onto your mind like sprinkles on a cupcake. First, let's add a few more ways that fungi reproduce. The phylum called Deuteromycota is very similar to Ascomycota and Basidiomycota, but has never been observed reproducing. So there's a mystery to solve. Second is another way that some fungi reproduce. Like starfish, when a part breaks off, they regrow and become two separate beings. Third, I wanted to give some props to lichen, because I'm a bit of a lichenology fan myself. To start, if you don't know what lichen is, I'm sad. But excited to educate you. Lichen is a symbiotic relationship between a mycobiont, a fungus, and a photobiont, usually algae or a cyanobacteria. The mycobiont gives a home, while the photobiont gives food via photosynthesis. Now, like fungi, the way that lichen reproduce is not extremely consistent, but here are the basics. When lichen reproduce asexually, they reproduce by using soredia. Soredia is a cluster of hyphae and algae that, when it lands, already has everything it needs to be able to grow. This has a high success rate, but usually takes longer to make. Lichen can also make isidia, which is just like a little bitty lichen that flows out and finds somewhere to land and grow. Sexually is trickier though. It's never been fully observed in the wild or a lab. So here's what we know. Spores will come out of asci. Remember those guys? The asci reside on apothecia or perithecia. Some apothecia are right on the lichen, and some others are on stalks called podetia. Perithecia are like sacs that also shoot out spores. Then once the spores fly out, they wait for algae to come along for the two to come together and mix. That part is what has never been witnessed. Fungi are preposterously complex, and I would not be surprised if they came from space based on how alien they sometimes seem. Each phylum has its own unique way of reproducing, and it's unbelievably cool and complex. I'm a fan of fungi.